By way of introduction, my name is Chris Millett. I'm your Member of Parliament for the Bay of Quinte. And I'm immensely proud of this place. As I'm sure they're all tired of me saying, I worked here extensively in the 1990s as a newspaper reporter working out of the daily newspaper in Belleville. I deployed with the men and women of this place. I spent many adventures in the field in some faraway places. I've seen the good work the people here do. On retirement, I loved the place so much I came back as a commissionaire. And the air terminal that we just all came through was my workspace on a part-time basis, and to the point where I even had some of the chaps there were saying to me, "Okay, Mr. MP, when are you going to get the air conditioning fixed in that front door that doesn't seem to want to open?" So I do have a deep and abiding love for this place and the men and women. That's why it's an honor to stand here today at 8 Wings CFB Trenton, one of the most critical pillars of our national defense system and a vital economic and cultural hub of this riding. It and the 5,000 plus serving members, civilian employees, and their families are proud symbols of service, sacrifice, and collaboration. This base and the people who serve here play an essential role not only in the Bay of Quinte region, but across our country and around the world. And we thank you deeply for your commitment. Last month, and also in attendance today, Minister of National Defence David McGuinty joined us here in Trenton for a tour, and an extensive tour it was. An announcement and a town hall listening session was held with CAF members, and it was an eye-opener, I'm sure, for the Minister. I know his visit in July was well appreciated by those on this base, and thank you for being here again, Minister. The fact you've come here to Trenton twice in just about a month is a sign of your deep commitment to 8 Wings CFB Trenton and the entire military as a whole. Now, as your Member of Parliament, I'm especially proud to welcome a leader who understands the weight of service, not only in government, but in piloting our nation through some of its most turbulent and complex global challenges. And he's a leader who fully understands and supports that the Canadian Armed Forces are a critical part of this equation. Mark Carney has spent his entire career navigating storms, economic, political, and strengthening our nation. Now, as Prime Minister, he brings that same clarity and calm resolve to the challenges we face at home and abroad. He knows in an ever-changing global order, we need the expertise and skills that the Canadian Armed Forces can bring as a stabilizing force domestically and internationally. It is a privilege, then, to welcome him here today to the heart of our military community here in Trenton, where leadership, duty, and service are not just words, but a way of life. So please join me in welcoming our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Mark Carney.
Over there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for that introduction, Chris, and for your service in all senses for this great institution and our country. Minister McGuinty, Chief of the Defence Staff, Carney, and all the Canadian Armed Forces members here today, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your service. It is great to be at CFB Trenton, Canada's largest Air Force base, home to generations of service members whose dedication and courage represent the very best of our country. Home to 8 Wing. This base is a hub for response and airlift operations in Canada and around the world. Virtually every mission involves CFB Trenton. With a fleet of tactical and strategic transport aircraft, the capabilities here are diverse. From delivering supplies to the high Arctic, we were just talking about ALERT, to facilitating peacekeeping missions around the world with our allies. Every year, hundreds of Air, Army, and Naval cadets come here to learn, to train, and to test themselves, preparing to wear the uniform and carry forward the proud tradition of service you represent. You in Trenton take on immense responsibilities, knowing it will require extraordinary personal sacrifice to protect Canada's peace and security. And the calls on your dedication have only been growing. We're living in an increasingly dangerous and divided world. The international order, built after the Second World War and reshaped following the Cold War, is under pressure. Russia is emboldened. China is more assertive. The long-held view that Canada's geographic location will protect us is becoming archaic. Our Arctic waters are increasingly open, and there have been rapid advances in cyber, artificial intelligence, quantum, and advanced missile capabilities. Climate change is making our country more vulnerable. The Arctic's melting. Our wildfires and floods are more frequent and devastating. And these are all threats to which the Canadian Armed Forces responds. The Canadian Forces keep our people and communities safe through major disasters. I'll give examples. This summer, Canadian Forces have helped communities in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, soon Newfoundland and Labrador, including already by safely evacuating over 6,000 Canadians. This week alone, Canadian Forces members, originally from CFB Trenton, airdropped life-saving humanitarian aid into Gaza. Canadian Armed Forces are standing guard in Latvia and continue to deploy around the world to stand with our allies in defense of peace and security. When a crisis breaks, or Canada's safety is threatened anywhere in the world, this base is the first to spring into action. And from CFB Trenton, fallen heroes have been repatriated to their families with honor, carried along the highway of heroes, draped in the maple leaf, to be etched in our memories. CFB Trenton is much more than an Air Force base. It's a community. And here, service isn't just lived by those in uniform, but also reflected in the strength, the support, and yes, the sacrifice of every military family. Their service is grounded in values, in a love for our country that makes those sacrifices possible, commitments that keep Canada strong. And in the minister's visit a few weeks ago, and visits to come, in my remarks today, we're investing in that strength. Le nouveau gouvernement du Canada va réinvestir pour rebâtir et réarmer les forces armées canadiennes grâce à une stratégie reposant sur 4 piliers. Nous allons investir dans ce qui est la base de la défense, ce qui servent, ainsi que l'équipement et l'infrastructure qu'ils utilisent. Nous allons améliorer et moderniser nos capacités militaires avec plus d'avions, de véhicules de combat, de drones et de systèmes de détection et en repérant les navires de la marine canadienne. Nous allons renforcer l'industrie canadienne de la défense et finalement, nous allons diversifier les partenariats du Canada en matière de défense. Au cœur de ces investissements se trouvent les hommes et les femmes des forces armées canadiennes. Canadians have always been proud of our armed forces and respect your unwavering dedication. But just as we have taken our security for granted for too long we have relied too heavily on that dedication of women and men who keep us secure. As the demands on our Canadian Armed Forces have increased, their resources and their salaries have not kept pace. And these are the men and women we trust to wear the maple leaf, the Canadian flag, and to risk their lives for it. Their pay, your pay, should reflect the weight of your responsibilities. In Halifax a few months ago, I shared our vision to rebuild, rearm, and reinvest in the Canadian Armed Forces in order to protect Canada's sovereignty, to bolster our industrial capacity and create new careers for our workers. And at that time, I committed that Canada's new government would raise the pay of all members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And today, with Minister McGuinty and with Deputy Millett, I'm proud to fulfill that commitment by announcing that all members of the Canadian Armed Forces will receive a pay raise. Specifically, there will be an 8% raise for colonels and above, a 13% raise for lieutenant colonels and below, and a 20% raise in starting pay for privates in the regular force. These increases will be retroactive to April 1st of this year. There'll be increases on top of base pay, putting more money in the pockets of everyone. We will also introduce a new military service pay benefit specifically tied to time in service, so the paychecks honor years in uniform. We will also introduce additional supports in the coming months for members preparing for combat and high-risk training, so they are paid fairly in addition for those intense commitments. We will make posting allowances fairer, based on how many times members have had to uproot their lives, the lives of their families, to protect ours. And will give more support when those moves take them far from their families. And if the members of the forces are called to serve here at home in a flood, a wildfire, or another disaster, we'll recognize that service with increased pay as well. And finally, we will target extra support to the critical trades where we need the personnel the most, so we can keep the Canadian Armed Forces ready at all times. These increases in pay and incentives will help us to revitalize and transform recruitment and retention, to bolster force readiness, and to ensure that members in uniform have the confidence and certainty that they need. At Canadian Armed Forces bases, like Trenton, service isn't an abstract ideal, it's a lived reality. And in that lived reality, behind every member in uniform, there's a family that serves right alongside them. Spouses who pack up the house on short notice, move across the country or around the world and build a new life from scratch. Kids who have to change schools and leave friends behind. Parents who spend holidays with an empty seat at the table, trusting the child they raised will make it home safely. So when we raise pay, we're not just recognizing the Armed Forces member, as important as that is, we're also helping to strengthen their families. Higher pay means greater financial resilience, more stability, more career choices for spouses, and more opportunities for their children to pursue their dreams. Lorsque les membres des forces armées seront mobilisés ici, au pays ou outre-mer, ils pourront se concentrer sur leur mission, sans autre préoccupation. C'est comme ça que nous faisons en sorte que lorsque les Canadiens et Canadiennes sont en détresse, lorsque nos alliés appellent à l'aide, ou lorsque notre souveraineté est menacée, les forces armées canadiennes seront prêtes. Now, in addition to the substantial pay raises, we're focused on providing our CAF members with the resources that they need and deserve. Canada's new government recognizes that our military infrastructure and equipment have aged, hindering our military preparedness. We recognize that only one of our 4 submarines is seaworthy, that less than half our maritime fleet and land vehicles are operational. So we're modernizing our military equipment and technology. We're building up our own defense and security industries and diversifying those international defense partnerships. With investments of over $9 billion this year, Canada will reach our 2% NATO pledge, 2% of GDP NATO pledge, half a decade before schedule. And we will further accelerate our investments in years to come. At the NATO summit earlier this year in The Hague, the Minister and I announced Canada's intention to meet the new defense investment pledge of 5% of annual GDP over the next decade by 2035. And to put that into context, our total spending on defense and security will quadruple by the end of this decade relative to 2023-24 levels. Now, we are laser focused on ensuring that this spending has the maximum impact on behalf of all Canadians. That means working with the best partners. It means getting maximum value for money with the greatest benefit for jobs and economic activity here in Canada. And that's why in June we concluded the new EU-Canada Security and Defence Partnership to advance Canada's participation in the European Security Initiative and Rearm Europe plan. This will give us better access to European defence partners for our needs, and it will give our defence suppliers greater opportunities to help supply Europe's needs. We are also in the process of creating a new defence procurement agency to move at pace to get our armed forces the equipment that they need when they need it. And our investments in defence will expand Canada's industrial capacity so we can equip Canadian armed forces using Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian critical minerals, Canadian cyber, and Canadian lumber. We will increase our security presence around the world, including to protect NATO's eastern flank, and by protecting Canada, we will protect NATO's western flank. Pour que nous puissions nous battre sur de nouveaux champs de bataille en territoire inconnu. Pour que nous puissions défendre chaque centimètre de notre territoire souverain, des fonds marins à l'Arctique en passant par le cyberspace. Pour que nos soldats, nos marins, nos aviateurs et nos cyberspécialistes aient les outils dont ils ont besoin pour protéger les Canadiens, nos intérêts et nos alliés. Pour que nos femmes et nos hommes en uniforme puissent servir avec confiance. So much of Canada's history has been written by those who served in our armed forces. As a country, we came of age at Vimy Ridge. We cemented our reputation as defender of freedom on Juno Beach and as a liberator of the Netherlands. Now that story continues to be written by heroes such as the men and women standing in this hangar. Those seated as well. Those chapters that they're writing, those chapters that are being written by the Canadian Armed Forces, may be new, but the theme remains the same. In times of crisis, when someone sees a maple leaf on a sleeve, they see hope, and they get help. So we're committing the resources so that the women and men of the Canadian Forces can deliver that help. Because at this hinge moment of history, Canada's leadership will be measured not just by the strength of our values, but also by the value of our strength. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now begin with the question period. We're going to do 50 minutes of question. On va faire 15 minutes de questions. Première question, Mackenzie Gray.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Have you not retaliated against American tariffs because you're concerned about the impact that would have in the upcoming CUSMA negotiations? And we've heard from Doug Ford, he thinks those negotiations are going to start in November, that Trump wants to move them up. When do you think that they're going to happen?
Thanks. First off, thanks for the question. You know, we're in a situation right now where 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. Our exports to the United States enter the United States tariff-free. 85% of U.S. trade into Canada is tariff-free. And we have put in place retaliatory tariffs in a way that looks to have the minimum impact here in Canada. That's why there's been various adjustments over time to emissions and others. We're in a position where we have the prospect, or we're engaged in discussions with the U.S., as you know, and have been for some time. The issues at the core of those negotiations will be similar to some of the issues that will come up naturally through CUSMA. There are issues around strategic sectors, steel, aluminum, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, lumber. And from our perspective, we're concentrating on those areas where our economies are deeply integrated, and working for win-win solutions between the two countries. To the last part of your question, in terms of the CUSMA review, as you know, it's scheduled for about 9 months from now. Normally, before any review process, there's consultations that begin well in advance, and so it would be natural that both in Canada, the United States, as well as Mexico, those consultations internally would begin in advance. And look, we're very conscious that there are a couple of negotiations in sequence, and the extent to which those negotiations can be brought together or inform each other, that's in the interest of all parties.
Earlier this week, you talked about the idea that you'd be looking to take counter tariffs off if it would help Canadian businesses. What sectors specifically are you looking at doing those things?
Look, it's a general point. It's something we have done. So, for example, in the auto sector, we've taken them off at quite substantial so-called remissions in the auto sector, also in steel as well, because parts used in Canada end up, the tariffs do more harm than good, or can do that. So we've done that consistently. We'll always look to that. And I think the other thing I'd say, and I'll finish on this, which is that, we'll always look at our actions in the context of our trade obligations and our future negotiations. Thank you.
Next question. Question question.
Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morning.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. In June, Minister McGuinty said there would be a 20% pay raise, and a lot of military members got their hopes up. They thought it meant across the board for all members. Why aren't all members getting that 20% pay hike?
This is a generational change in pay for the Canadian Armed Forces, and what we're doing is doing several things. One is the increases, the 20% for those coming into the forces, the privates, 8% up to the level of lieutenant colonel, 13% up to the level of lieutenant colonel, and then 8% colonel and above. Those are significant changes. They also come with a series of other supplements, time of service, supplement for that, in theater operations, being moved for multiple times, domestic responsibilities that we're grateful that the forces are meeting in cases of emergency, but also our hardship and others, the ones that I detailed. So I would underscore that, we have not seen something, Canada's not seen something like this this millennium. It hasn't seen it since the late 1990s. So it's a generational shift, and we're proud of it.
You ordered a review of the F-35 contract during this rift with the U.S. The military has long said they want the F-35. We're now hearing that the military has told you they want to stick with that contract. Did you expect the forces to potentially say something different? And how much of this is part of a negotiation tactic with the President Trump?
No, I'd say a couple of things. First off, the review is not completed, so there's no settled advice into the government. First point. Second, the nature of aerial combat, the nature of warfare, the nature of our responsibilities, the scale of our investment, all of those elements have changed over the course of recent years, and then with respect to the commitment, the resources that we're going to put in, that quadrupling of resources by the end of this decade. We have a responsibility to make sure that those are spent in the way that has a maximum impact. I'll give you an example. We have a much greater threat, associated responsibilities in the Arctic. We've taken a number of steps over the horizon radar, early stage of that process, having forces on land, air, and the sea, 365 days a year, moving that from 4 months. But we also need the appropriate air capabilities for the Arctic, for the runways in the Arctic, for the threats that we're faced in the Arctic as well. And so part of the consideration is the F-35 best suited for that relative to other options. Other considerations, as Canadians would expect, is value for money and economic impact here in Canada. So I would make the core point that the review is driven by the need and the responsibilities and approach that we're taking to making sure that this very large and necessary investment in defense is done so most effectively.
Next question, Canadian Press.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. Kyle Duggan from the Canadian Press. Can I get your reaction to Israel saying that Israel planning to take over Gaza City?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I would say first, we join others, many others, in viewing that this is wrong, that this action is not going to contribute to an improvement in the humanitarian situation on the ground. It is going to put the lives of the hostages at greater risk rather than lessening it. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire. We reiterate our call for Hamas to immediately return all of the hostages and their remains. We reiterate that Hamas has no role going forward, and we'll continue to work with our allies to contribute what we can to achieving those outcomes.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, could I get your reaction to the jobs reports, loss of 41,000 jobs, worse than expected? Thank you.
Sure. A couple of things. One is that obviously we look very closely at developments in the labor market. We had a very strong job report in June, over 80,000 jobs created. We now have the July jobs reduction of just over 40,000. What's interesting about, if you look across those areas, the geographic spread is, in the July report, is more in Western Canada. It's in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Less in the manufacturing sectors where we will expect, we expect to see pressure. And there are pressures, which is why we're taking action in steel and lumber, and we will in autos and other areas. I'd also note that in that jobs report, the unemployment rate held steady, and for the second straight month, we've seen a further acceleration in wage growth. So wage growth now at 3.5%, up from below 3%. So wage growth now outpacing the growth in CPI. So that, combined with the tax cut that we put in place, combined with the removal of the consumer carbon tax and other measures, progress on cost of living. Just to be clear, progress. We're not satisfied that that's enough. There's much more that needs to be done, which is why we're looking to make sure, and to bring it back to today, and why we're here, we're looking to make sure, and we will make sure, that as we build our military, we'll build our economy as well. Thank you.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Andréa
Bonjour.
Williams de Radio-Canada. Première question, on parle d'un investissement de 2 milliards de dollars annuellement. Quel est le retour sur investissement pour les Canadiens?
Tout d'abord, oui, c'est un investissement, mais au fond, c'est correct, c'est équitable. Parce que les membres des Forces armées canadiennes ont beaucoup de responsabilités. Ils font beaucoup de sacrifices pour notre pays. Et ce qui est clair est que leurs salaires ne sont pas à un niveau, avant que cette augmentation, un niveau approprié. Premier point. Deuxièmement, en ce qui concerne le rendement, si on peut dire, pour cet investissement, c'est la sécurité de notre pays, au fond.
À un moment où beaucoup de Canadiens, beaucoup d'Ontariens craignent de perdre leur emploi en raison des tarifs douaniers. Il y a beaucoup d'incertitudes. Comment justifier que des membres des Forces armées canadiennes obtiennent une augmentation de salaire alors qu'il y a des fonctionnaires qui demandent la même chose depuis longtemps?
Oui, depuis longtemps, mais depuis longtemps, il n'y avait pas une augmentation des salaires pour les forces armées canadiennes. Et les hommes et les femmes ici et à travers le pays et à travers le monde, ils travaillent pour les Canadiens, ils sacrifient pour nous, sans une augmentation de leur salaire. Alors c'est une question de timing, mais au fond c'est une question d'être équitable. Je suis fier de cette initiative.
Next question, CTV.
Oui.
Judy Trin, CTV News. Prime Minister, given that you have said that Canada will recognize a Palestinian state, and given that Prime Minister Netanyahu has an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, and yet he is still considering and he wants to take over parts of Gaza City, will the Canadian government consider sanctions against Israel?
Thank you for the question. We are working on multiple fronts to try to bring a level of stability to the region, then security, then peace to the region. And in terms of those fronts, yes, working with allies, working with the French, working with the British, working with partners in the Middle East, other partners in the Middle East, to work towards stabilization of the situation. And we don't see the road. What we see is the erosion of the possibility of a two-state solution because of facts on the ground, actions on the ground. And that's why we made the announced the intention predicated on various factors that we did. But what we're also doing, and again, I want to bring it right back to where we are today, is doing what we can under extremely difficult circumstances to provide humanitarian aid to those suffering in Gaza with our Jordanian partners, but very importantly, directly with the Canadian Armed Forces. Earlier this week, just under 22,000 pounds of aid brought through Cyprus and airdropped into Gaza. And that's the forces at its best in one of the worst situations in the world.
Prime Minister, are sanctions on the table against Israel? Is that being discussed?
Look, there's various routes, immediate assistance, the work we're doing, as I say, with partners. We've made announcements. I'm not on the cusp of making another announcement at this point.
Next question, New York Times.
Ian Austin.
Yeah.
Prime Minister. I don't think anyone disputes the sacrifice and dedication of most members of the armed forces, but even the head of the Army has recently expressed his immense frustration at what's happened to the force's reputation because of those groups in Quebec City and the online group in Ottawa. What do the forces need to do to wind that back, to show Canadians that
Well, I think, thank you for the question. The first is to take every situation seriously, to be absolutely transparent about the situation, obviously having to respect due process and disciplinary or court proceedings that can evolve. The second is to be systematic. Okay, so you referenced some terrible situations, at least as reported. But there is a more general issue. By systematic, it's the reforms that the Chief of the Defense Staff and the Minister and their colleagues are overseeing that reinforce the best of the forces culture. First point. The second, what comes with that in being systematic is you survey the forces and you have mechanisms to discover, as you should in any organization, your organization, the Government of Canada, where you can report where there are harassment issues or issues of hate speech or other elements. Track those, work to reduce those. And what we're also very much informed by, and the Minister and the Chief can speak more directly to this if needed, is that a very comprehensive report was done by Louise Arbour, and over 60% of those recommendations are already implemented, and the forces are working through the balance. So first is to call it what it is. Secondly is to be systematic about understanding what's going on across a huge, complex organization. That's as true for the Government of Canada as it is for the forces, as it is for private sector organization. And then taking action on the specific cases, but also doing those systematic reforms, which I just referenced through the Arbour recommendations.
We'll have time for one last question.
Hello, Prime Minister. Tim Durkin with CJBQ and Quinny News in Belleville. Certainly a big news announcement, not just for the area, but for the entire country. You did speak on it quickly, but I was wondering if you could just circle back to the emergency response component of what the RCAF and CAF has been doing this year.
I think it's, thank you for that, because I think it's hard to overstate the contribution of the forces. And I'm going to speak specifically to the wildfire situation. You know, back in, well, in the spring, so early in the season, when you don't, expect things to have moved as quickly as they did, I received a call from Premier Canoe within, I'm going to say an hour, but it was less than an hour, connected to the Minister, who had already then connected to the Chief, and before a formal, what's called a request for assistance, which comes from a province, was put in place, the forces were deploying to extreme situations, or getting ready to deploy, I should say, to extreme situations where people, under threat, remote, in this case, largely Indigenous communities under threat, by being encircled by fire, and airlifted out. The C-17s, I'll get my planes right, the C-17s have been lifting Chinooks out to some of these hotspots so that the forces can do that work. So across, sadly, we're now probably at half, we are at half of our provinces where the forces have deployed. And this is above and beyond, this is above and beyond their core responsibilities. And they do it without hesitation. They're literally running into the fire in order to provide those services. Over 6,000 Canadians have been evacuated, and many more have received the reassurance that if needed, they would be as well. And that's hard to quantify, and we're very much in their debt. And again, to go back to the earlier question, I'm sorry to keep bringing it back kind of into today's announcement. There's no extra pay for that, or there hasn't been. There's no, and there's no questioning of that, of course, by the forces. But we think in terms of fairness, there should be, and there will be. Thanks.
Thank you. This was an end to our press conference.
Okay.
C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Okay.